me now.
What is the sound of grief? For many of us, it is silence. The silence where a familiar laugh used to be. The silence on the other end of a phone line that will never be answered again. We learn to live with this quiet, this finality. We accept that some conversations are over forever. But what if they're not? What if, in the dead of night, your phone rings, flashing a number you know by heart but haven't dialed in years? A number that belongs to someone who is gone. Your first instinct is denial. It's a mistake, a cruel prank, a glitch in the network. But a deeper, more primal part of you, a part that aches with loss, feels a flicker of impossible hope. You answer the call, and through a veil of crackling static, you hear a voice you thought you'd never hear again. Today, we explore 4 true haunting accounts from people who received that impossible phone call. Stories that blur the line between technology and the supernatural, between a final goodbye and a terrifying hello. These are not stories of comfort. They are stories of a connection that refuses to be severed. But before we answer that call, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell. You don't want to miss the message when it finally comes through.
I need to tell you something.
Our first account comes from Ethan, a 25-year-old architect who had recently lost the most important person in his life. His grandmother, Eleanor, wasn't just a relative, she was his anchor. He had spent his childhood summers at her cozy, cluttered house, a place that always smelled of cinnamon and old books. She was the keeper of his stories, his confidant. Her death 6 months prior had left a gaping, silent void in his life. He found himself living in a world that felt muted, its colors washed out. His modern, minimalist apartment, once a source of pride, now felt sterile and empty, a stark contrast to the warmth of his memories. He kept her number in his phone. He knew it was morbid. He had been there with his mother when they called. To disconnect the landline, he had heard the operator confirm the cancellation. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to delete the contact. Grandma. Seeing her name, there was a small, painful comfort, a digital ghost he refused to exorcise. One rainy Tuesday night, he was sitting alone in his silent apartment, scrolling through old photos of her on his laptop. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked window. It was late, almost 2 a.m. His phone, sitting on the coffee table beside him, suddenly lit up, vibrating against the glass surface with a loud buzz. He glanced at the screen, annoyed, assuming it was a spam call, but his breath caught in his throat. The screen displayed 2 words that were both impossible and undeniable. Grandma calling. His heart hammered against his ribs. A wave of cold dread mixed with a surge of insane, illogical hope washed over him. His mind raced, supplying a dozen rational explanations. It was a network glitch. It was a cruel number. Spoofing prank. His mother was calling from the old house for some reason, and the caller ID was malfunctioning. Any explanation was better than the impossible truth. The phone continued its insistent buzzing. With a trembling hand, he picked it up and swiped to answer. His voice was a choked whisper. Hello? The line was not silent. It was filled with a thick, heavy static, like an open line to a storm. On a distant planet. It crackled and popped, a sound both empty and full. He asked again, his voice louder, more desperate. Grandma? Eleanor? Is that you? There was no response. Just the roar of the static, a sound like a vast, empty ocean. He held the phone to his ear for a full minute, listening to the noise, straining to hear a voice, a breath, anything. Then, with a sharp click, the line went dead. He stared at his phone's dark screen, his mind reeling. He checked his call log. There it was. Grandma. 1 minute, 14 seconds. It had been real. He tried to call the number back. An automated voice, cold, and robotic. Informed him, "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." He didn't sleep that night. He sat on his couch until dawn, replaying the moment in his head, trying to force it into a logical box. It was a prank. It had to be. Someone was messing with him. But who? And how? A few nights later, it happened again. 3:07 a.m. The same name lit up his screen. This time, he was prepared. He took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the record button on his phone's screen recorder before he answered. "Hello?" The same oppressive static filled the line. But this time, underneath the noise, there was something else. It was faint, distant, and distorted, like a song being played on an old, warped vinyl record. It was a melody, a simple, gentle tune, and he recognized it instantly. It was the lullaby his grandmother used to hum to him when he was a small child, sick with a fever. A simple, forgotten tune she had made up herself, one that existed only in the memories they shared. No one else in the world knew that song. The melody played on, a ghostly, wavering tune, before the static swelled and the line went dead again. This time, there was no logical explanation. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a glitch. This was something else. The recording he had made captured only the static. The melody was too faint, lost in the noise, as if it were meant only for his ears. The calls became his obsession. He stopped sleeping, waiting for the nightly ritual. He downloaded audio filtering software, hoping to clean up the recordings. He contacted the phone company again and again, speaking to confused technicians who assured him the number was inactive, that no call could possibly originate from it. He was a man haunted by a ghost in the machine, driven by a need for answers. He went to his parents' house and retrieved the boxes of his grandmother's belongings that had been stored in their attic. He spent a weekend sifting through a lifetime of memories. Old letters, faded photographs, crocheted blankets, and dusty knickknacks. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt a pull towards the past. As if the answer to the impossible calls wasn't in the future of technology, but buried deep in his grandmother's history. In the bottom of a heavy, cedar-lined chest, he found it. It was a child's toy from the 1960s. A voiceograph, a small, plastic device that could record and play back about 30 seconds of audio onto a tiny, grooved plastic disc. It was a primitive, clunky piece of technology. It was also broken. The plastic casing was cracked, and the small recording disc was missing. Tucked beside the toy was a small folded note, yellowed with age. It was in his grandfather's handwriting, dated shortly after his grandmother had passed. The note read, "Found Eleanor's old voiceograph while cleaning out her sewing room. She loved this silly thing. She recorded her favorite lullaby for the kids on it decades ago. The one she always hummed. Had stopped working years back, but she could never bear to throw it away. A piece of her is still in it, I suppose." Ethan stared at the broken toy, then at the note. The lullaby. That night, back in his apartment, he waited. He placed the old toy recorder on the coffee table in front of him. At 2:48 a.m., his phone lit up. Grandma calling. He answered, his audio software running, his speakers on, the apartment filled with the sound of roaring static. And underneath it, the faint, distorted lullaby began to play. But this time, listening with a new, focused intensity, he heard another sound mixed in with the music. It was a soft, rhythmic click-whir, a mechanical sound, a sound of effort, of a small motor trying and failing to turn. He looked down at the old toy recorder in front of him. He picked it up. He could feel a faint vibration coming from within it, and when he held it to his ear, he could hear it. The same soft, rhythmic click-whir coming from inside the plastic casing. The record button on the toy was depressed, stuck in the on position. A small, internal mechanism was clicking rhythmically, trying to turn a spindle that no longer held a disc. The toy wasn't just a toy. It was a transmitter. It's broken, ancient, Electronics were somehow generating a low-frequency signal, a phantom broadcast of a memory stored in its circuitry, and the modern, sensitive network of his smartphone was impossibly picking it up. Interpreting the stray signal as a call from the last number associated with his grandmother. The clicking he heard on the phone was the sound of the broken machine in his own hand. The lullaby on the phone began to fade. The static softened, but it was replaced by a new sound from the recording. A voice. It was his grandmother's, but young, clear, and full of love. A perfect recording from 50 years ago. The voice said, "I'll always be with you, my darling." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. It was a final, beautiful goodbye. He smiled, a sense of peace settling over him for the first time in months. Then, another voice cut in. It came from the same recording, but it was not his grandmother's. It was a man's voice. Cold, clipped, and staticky, like an all-time radio announcer. And it said, "We know, and we're listening." The call ended. Ethan sat in his silent apartment, staring at the broken toy in his hand. The comfort he'd felt moments before was gone, replaced by an icy, profound terror. The calls hadn't been from his grandmother. She was just the recording, the bait. The device hadn't just been a beacon for him. It was a beacon for something else, something that had been listening to her family, through this silly little toy for decades. And now it knew his number.
Listen to me.
Our next story is about the echoes left behind, not in a house or on a phone line, but in the digital ether of a voicemail box. It comes from a woman named Karen, who learned that sometimes a message can be a bridge to a place you should never visit. Karen's husband, David, was the love of her life. He was a geologist, a man of science and logic, but with a soul full of poetry. He was killed instantly in a head-on collision on a rain-slicked highway, just a mile from their home. The week following his death was a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on her chest. The silence in their small house was the worst part. The silence where his booming laugh should have been. The silence where his off-key humming should have been. A week after the funeral, numb and exhausted, Karen was going through the mundane task of clearing her phone's full voicemail box. Call after call from concerned friends, relatives, her boss. She deleted them one by one, a sad, robotic chore. Then she came to the last one. The timestamp was from Tuesday at 6:15 p.m., the exact time of the accident. The number was David's. Her heart seized. He had called her. In his final moments. He had tried to reach her. A wave of fresh, agonizing grief washed over her. She imagined him, trapped in the wreckage, his last thought being of her. With a trembling finger, she pressed play, bracing herself for a sound she knew would break her heart all over again. But there was no sound of a crash. No sirens. No pained goodbyes. There was only David's voice, perfectly calm, happy, and impossibly normal. His familiar voice was a warm shock in the cold, silent house. The message began. Hey, it's me. Just leaving the quarry now. I'm stopping to get that bottle of wine you like. I'll be home in about 20 minutes. Can't wait to see you. Love you. The message ended. A soft click, then silence. Karen stared at her phone, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. The message was impossible. The quarry was an hour away. If he had called at 6:15 p.m., it couldn't have been a mile from home. And the message itself, it was so normal, so mundane. There was no hint of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Could the timestamp be wrong? A network error? She listened to it again and again. His voice was a comforting balm and a confusing poison. She saved the message, a digital ghost of a future that never happened. She told herself it was a strange, bittersweet anomaly, a final misplaced message from a life that was now over. A few days later, she was trying to sort through David's office. She found his work phone, the one issued by his company. Its screen was shattered, likely from the impact, but she managed to power it on. The call log showed his last dialed number. Hers. The time, 6:15 p.m. The facts seemed to align. But as she scrolled through his sent text messages, she found one that made her blood run cold. It was a text he had sent to his boss at 6:10 p.m., just 5 minutes before he called her. It read, "Running late. Stuck in a massive traffic jam on the interstate. Must be an accident up ahead. Won't be home for at least another 2 hours." The two realities couldn't coexist. He couldn't be stuck in traffic on the interstate and, 5 minutes later, be leaving the quarry, an hour in the opposite direction, promising to be home in 20 minutes. The voicemail wasn't just a misplaced message. It was a lie. A message from a reality that had not occurred. The discovery sent Karen into a spiral. She became an obsessive detective of her own grief. She obtained the police report. It confirmed the accident happened at 6:15 p.m. on the highway coming from the direction of the city, not the quarry. It confirmed he had been killed instantly. There was no 20-minute window. There was no stopping for wine. She listened to the voicemail dozens of times a day. It became her new reality, an alternate timeline she could escape into. In that timeline, one night, unable to sleep, she was listening to the message for the 100th time, her ear pressed to the phone speaker. This time, however, she noticed something she hadn't before. It was in the background, underneath David's calm, happy voice. A sound, a faint rhythmic sound. It was the sound of a clock, a grandfather clock, ticking steadily. Tick, tock, tick, tock. But they didn't own a grandfather clock. She frantically searched online for recordings of different grandfather clocks, her heart pounding. The sound in the voicemail was distinctive. It had a slight, almost imperceptible catch on the talk. After hours of searching, she found a match. It was a video tour of a local antique shop, a place called the Gilded Hourglass, about 30 miles away in a small, forgotten town. And in the video, standing in the back of the shop, was a massive, ornate grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging. Tick-tock, a perfect match for the one in her voicemail. The next day, driven by an obsession she no longer tried to understand, she drove to the shop. It was a dusty, cluttered place, filled with the ghosts of other people's lives. And there, in the back, stood the clock. It was even more imposing. In person, she approached the owner, an elderly, stooped man with kind eyes. Her voice was shaking. "I have a strange question. This clock, has it been here long?" The old man smiled. "Oh, that's the heart of this shop. Been in my family for generations. Keeps perfect time. A real beauty, isn't she?" Karen felt insane as she asked, "Did you sell a bottle of wine recently? A specific kind?" She named the wine from the voicemail. The owner's smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. We don't sell wine, ma'am. This is an antique shop." He looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" Defeated, Karen turned to leave. She didn't know what she had expected. As she reached the door, the old man called out, "You know, the strangest thing happened with that clock, though. Last Tuesday evening, around 6:15. Karen froze, her hand on the doorknob. She whispered, "What happened?" The man said, shaking his head. It just stopped. Never done that before. Stayed frozen for a good hour, then started right back up again. Good as new. Almost like time itself. Just took a little break." Karen left the shop, her mind a blank slate of shock. The clock had stopped at the exact moment of David's accident, the exact moment he had left her the voicemail. She drove home in a daze. The voicemail wasn't from a different place. It was from a different time. A pocket of time, a bubble reality, where he hadn't taken the highway. He had taken the back roads. He had stopped at the antique shop. He had, somehow, impossibly, existed for a few more moments in a world where he was still coming home. That night, she decided to listen to the message one last time. A final visit to the ghost of a timeline that wasn't hers. She pressed play. David's voice filled her ear, warm and familiar. Hey, it's me. Just leaving the quarry now. But this time, the message didn't end. After David said, "Love you," there wasn't a click. There was a pause. And then, a new sound. It was David's voice again, but it was different. It was hushed, frantic, terrified. A harsh whisper that cut through the background ticking of the antique shop clock. "Karen, don't listen to this. It's a trap. It's not the right way home. Something is wrong with the road. I'm turning back now. Oh God." The message ended, with the sound of screeching tires and a sickening final crunch of metal. The first message, the happy one, had been a lie, a lure. The real message had been buried underneath it all along. The glitch hadn't been a comfort. It had been a warning. The call wasn't from David Dodd. It was from the echo of his death, a recorded moment of terror that had somehow, impossibly, found her number. She was left with a final, horrifying truth. She hadn't just saved a message from her husband. She had saved the last 30 seconds of his life. A recording of the moment his reality and hers had shattered forever.
Can anyone hear me?
Our next story is about the noise between stations. The empty hiss of the void. It's about a teenager named Jessica who learned that sometimes the most terrifying messages aren't in the words that are spoken, but in the ones that are desperately trying to break through the static. Jessica and Chloe had been best friends since kindergarten. They were inseparable, two halves of the same whole. Their friendship was a universe of inside jokes, shared secrets, and late-night phone calls that lasted until dawn. Last summer, that universe had collapsed. Chloe, a talented and fearless rock climber, had suffered a fatal fall during a solo expedition in the mountains of Colorado. She was only 17. The grief was a physical weight for Jessica. The silence Chloe left behind was deafening. Jessica's phone, once a source of constant connection, became a painful reminder of her absence. She would scroll through old text messages, look at photos, and sometimes, late at night, she would find herself dialing Chloe's number. Just to hear her familiar, cheerful voicemail message one more time before the line was inevitably disconnected. 3 months after the accident, Jessica was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house dark and silent around her. It was just after 1 a.m. Her phone, on the nightstand beside her, suddenly rang. The sharp, piercing sound made her jump. She reached for it, expecting a late-night text from a friend, but the name on the screen made her heart stop. Chloe calling. It was a picture of them, smiling, taken on their last beach trip together. It was Chloe's contact, her number, the one Jessica knew had been disconnected weeks ago. Her mind raced. A prank? Chloe's parents calling from her old phone. But why? At this hour? Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. Part of her screamed not to answer, that this was a cruel joke. But a larger part, a part that ached with an impossible hope, couldn't resist. She swiped to answer. She whispered, her voice cracking. Chloe? The line was pure, deafening static, a roaring, hissing wall of noise, like 1,000 radios tuned to dead channels. It was so loud, she had to pull the phone away from her ear. She tried again, shouting. Over the noise. Hello? Is anyone there? She listened for a full minute, her ear pressed cautiously to the phone. But there was nothing but the chaotic roar. It was a call from nowhere, a conversation with the void. Finally, with a click, the line went dead. She looked at her call log. The call was real. The next night, it happened again. This time, Jessica was ready. She plugged her phone into a set of high-quality speakers. The volume turned low and had her laptop's audio recording software open. When the call came through, she answered and immediately hit record. The same wall of static filled the room, a sound so dense it felt physical. She let it play, listening with an intensity that made her head ache. For minutes, it was just noise, random, meaningless, electronic chaos. But then she heard it for just a split second, a change in the pattern, a modulation in the hiss. It sounded like a word, buried deep, almost completely swallowed by the noise. She spent the next day analyzing the recording. She was a novice with audio software, but she was determined. She applied noise reduction filters. She isolated frequencies. She slowed down the playback speed. She listened to the same 2-second snippet of audio hundreds of times. And finally, she was able to isolate it. It was a single word, spoken in a voice that was distorted and weak, but undeniably Chloe's. The word was cold. A shiver traced its way down Jessica's spine. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a message. Chloe was somewhere cold. Jessica's logical mind tried to fight back. It was a coincidence, a random formation of sound in the white noise that her grieving brain had shaped into a word, into a voice it desperately wanted to hear. It had to be. The calls continued, once every night, always between 1 and 3 a.m. Each time, Jessica recorded, and each time, she would spend the entire next day in a painstaking, forensic analysis of the static. The process was grueling, emotionally draining. It was like trying to piece together a ghost from dust. But slowly, she began to find more words, more fragments of a message from the void. Cold, dark, can't see, fell. Each word was a new piece of a horrifying puzzle. Chloe wasn't at peace. She wasn't in a better place. She was trapped somewhere cold and dark, reliving the moment of her fall. The calls weren't a comfort. They were a cry for help from a soul that hadn't moved on. Jessica tried to tell her parents. They were kind, but deeply concerned for her mental state. They suggested grief counseling, a break from school. They didn't believe her. She tried to show them the recordings, but to their ears, it was just static. The messages, it seemed, were only for her. One night, the call came later than usual, close to 4 a.m. The static seemed different this time. It was louder, more frantic, more aggressive. Jessica recorded it and began the now familiar process of cleaning the audio. This time, she isolated a longer phrase. The voice was still Chloe's, but it was filled with a terror that Jessica had never heard before. Not alone. It's here. It's. The phrase was cut off by a sound that made Jessica throw her headphones to the floor. It was a deep, guttural growl, a sound that was ancient and predatory. It was not human. And it was followed by a single, sharp, terrified scream from Chloe. Then, the line went dead. Jessica sat frozen in her chair, the scream echoing in her silent room. Chloe wasn't alone wherever she was. Something was with her. Something was hunting her. The phone rang again, instantly. She looked at the screen. Chloe calling. With a trembling hand, she answered, putting it on speaker. The roaring static filled the room. But now, the deep, guttural growl was clear, closer, no longer buried in the noise. It was a hungry, menacing sound. And then, a new voice spoke. It was not Chloe's. It was a cold, calm, impossibly deep voice that seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate. The voice said, the words perfectly clear, with no static at all. She can't talk right now, but she wanted me to give you a message. Jessica whispered, backing away from the phone on her desk. Who is this? The voice continued, ignoring her question. She says, it's your turn. She wants you to join her. It's so cold here, and we are so hungry. The growl returned, louder now, a sound that seemed to be coming from the phone speaker and from every dark corner of her room. At once, Jessica screamed and hurled her phone against the wall. It shattered into a dozen pieces, the battery skittering across the floor. The sound stopped. The room was silent. She thought it was over, but the next night, her mother's phone rang, then her father's, then her best friend from school. One by one, the thing in the static began to call everyone in Chloe's old contact. Liz thought it never spoke to them. They only heard the roar of the static, and if they listened closely enough, the faint, terrified whisper of a girl trapped in the cold and the dark. The calls weren't just for Jessica anymore. The haunting had become a broadcast. The thing that had taken Chloe was now using her memory, her voice, her connections as a lure, casting a wide net into the world of the living, patiently waiting for someone else to answer the call.
One last call.
Our final story is not about a call that was received, but about one that was found. It's about a man named Michael, who learned that some messages are like time capsules, buried in the digital dust, waiting for the right person to press play. And sometimes, those messages contain a truth more terrifying than any ghost. Michael's father, Richard, had been a man of quiet routines. A retired electrician, he spent his days in his workshop, a converted garage behind the small house he'd lived in for 50 years. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was a man of action, of fixing things. 3 months ago, his heart, a mechanism he couldn't fix, had simply stopped. Michael, his only son, was now faced with the monumental task of emptying the house, a place layered with a lifetime of memories, tools, and unspoken history. The house was a time capsule itself. In the kitchen, a rotary phone still hung on the wall. In the living room, a massive console television sat like a silent, wooden beast. Michael spent days sorting through his father's life, each object a small ghost. It was in his father's workshop that he found the answering machine. It was an ancient model from the late 1980s, a clunky beige box that used microcassette tapes. It was unplugged, covered in a fine layer of sawdust. Michael almost threw it in the trash bin, but a wave of nostalgia stopped him. He remembered that machine, remembered hearing his own teenage voice on it, leaving messages for his dad. On a whim, he took it back into the house, found an outlet, and plugged it in. The machine whirred to life with a low hum. The small red light on the front blinked once. One new message. Michael frowned. That was impossible. This machine hadn't been plugged in for years, maybe decades. His father had switched to a digital voicemail service long ago. He looked at the tape counter. It read 0. He pressed the play button. The tape hissed and crackled. The sound quality was terrible. A woman's voice, tinny and distant, began to speak. It was his mother. But his mother had been dead for 10 years. Her voice was a ghost from the past. Richard, it's me. I'm at the market. I forgot my list. Do we need milk? Call me back. The message ended with a soft click. Michael sat there, stunned. He remembered that message. He remembered hearing it as a kid. His mother, calling about milk. It must have been the last message received before his father unplugged the machine. A harsh, perfect little moment of domestic life preserved on a fragile magnetic tape. A bittersweet smile touched his lips. He was about to press stop when another sound came from the machine. It wasn't a message. It was a beep, followed by the sound of his father picking up the phone. Hey, was talking to someone. It was a recorded phone conversation. His father's voice sounded younger, stronger. Hello? A man's voice, smooth and unfamiliar, replied. Is this Richard? Who's asking? That doesn't matter. The voice said. What matters is the job you did for us last week. The wiring at the old cannery. Michael leaned closer. The old cannery on the edge of town had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. His father had never mentioned working there. His father's voice was tense now. It was a private job. You paid me in cash. We're done. The man replied, his voice losing its smoothness, gaining a sharp, menacing edge. We're not done. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. Richard. In the basement. You should have kept your eyes on the wires. A long pause on the tape. Michael could hear his father's heavy breathing. His father finally said, his voice low, I didn't see anything. That's good, the man said. That's very good. Let's keep it that way. Because if we hear that you did see something, well, you have a lovely family, Richard. A beautiful wife. A young son. It would be a shame if something were to happen to them. Are we clear? Clear, his father whispered. The line clicked dead. Michael felt a chill seep into his bones. This wasn't a saved message. The answering machine had malfunctioned. It had accidentally recorded a phone call his father had made or received years ago. A threatening call. A secret his father had carried to his grave. He looked at the tape counter. It hadn't reset. He pressed play again. The tape continued to turn. Another beep. Another recorded conversation. This one just a few days after the first. According to the timestamps his father would meticulously record in his old ledgers. It was his father's voice, frantic this time. You have to meet me. I can't do this. I have to tell someone. The same smooth voice replied, that would be unwise. I have proof, his father said. I took pictures. What you're doing down there, it's not right. The voice was cold as ice. Pictures can be lost. Richard, just like people, you have one last chance to forget what you saw. I suggest you take it. The line went dead. Michael's mind was racing. His father, the quiet, simple electrician, had been involved in something dangerous. Something that had terrified him into a lifetime of silence. He now understood his father's quiet nature, his constant looking over his shoulder, his insistence on locking the doors at night. It wasn't just his personality. It was fear. He let the tape play. It was mostly empty hiss for a long time. Then, one final recording. The quality was even worse, full of static and a strange, high-pitched whine. It was his father's voice, but it was a whisper, hoarse and desperate. It sounded like he was in a small enclosed space. His father whispered, Michael, if you're hearing this, I didn't make it. The cannery, it wasn't just wiring. It was a machine, a big one, in the basement. I don't know what it does, but the people who own it, they're not from around here. They're not. The voice was cut off by a loud, metallic clang, followed by a surge of static. Then, a new voice spoke on the tape. The same smooth, cold voice from the other calls. But this time, it wasn't threatening. It was speaking to someone else, not his father. The subject is terminated, the voice said. He left a message on his home machine. It's been remotely wiped. All except the first one, the innocuous one, that will remain as a buffer. The line is now clean. A final click. The tape stopped turning. Michael sat there in the silent house, the truth crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. His father's death hadn't been from a heart attack. He had been silenced, and the message from his mother, the one about the milk, hadn't been a sweet memory. It had been a decoy, a digital ghost left behind to hide a murder. The answering machine wasn't broken. It had been manipulated, hacked from a distance by people with technology he couldn't comprehend. They had intended to wipe the tape clean, but their remote wipe had failed. The magnetic tape, old and decaying, had somehow held on to the echoes of the conversations they had tried to erase. The threatening calls, his father's last desperate warning, they had all been preserved, hidden in the static waiting. He looked at the answering machine, this clunky, beige relic from the past. It wasn't just a machine. It was a witness. The only witness to his father's murder. He suddenly felt a cold dread. The voice on the tape had said the line was clean. They had wiped it, or thought they had. But what if they were still listening? What if plugging in this old machine, playing this impossible tape, had just triggered an alert? What if he had just announced to his father's killers that their secret was out? His own phone, a modern smartphone, lay on the table beside. The old answering machine, as if on cue, it lit up. A new text message had arrived from an unknown number. He opened it, his hand shaking. The message contained a single, terrifying photo. It was a picture of him, taken from outside the window, showing him sitting at the kitchen table, his face illuminated by the dim light of the room, staring in horror at the old, beige answering machine. The photo had been taken just seconds ago. A lullaby traveling through a broken machine. A message from a pocket of time that shouldn't exist. A desperate plea buried in static. And a secret that was waiting on an old cassette tape. These stories remind us that the connections we forge in life are powerful. So powerful, in fact, that sometimes not even death can sever the line completely. They show us that technology, in its attempt to connect us, can sometimes become a conduit for something much older, something that refuses to be forgotten. A phone call becomes more than a conversation. It becomes an echo chamber for grief, for warnings, for secrets that were never meant to be heard. The next time your phone rings from an unknown number, you have to wonder, who is really on the other end of the line? And are you prepared to hear what they have to say? If these stories made you think twice about answering your phone, prove you're on this frequency by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like, and sharing this video. Your support ensures these connections are never lost. Now, if you're ready to explore the fears that don't need a phone to reach you, the ones that are already in the room with you, click the video on your screen for our next collection. 6 true stories of something hiding in the corner of your eye. See you there, if you dare to look.